Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're just going to get started in a few minutes. People are still entering the room. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, it looks like we are at a stopping point of people entering.
I'll keep
and then somebody pops on. All right, well, I'm going to get started. So welcome everyone. We're going to start as we did in our last session with a land acknowledgement. Raise the Bar Consulting and facilitators of the Courageous Conversation series respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of this land that we live and work on. We recognize the continuing connection of Indigenous peoples to their country, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Jennifer, did you want to?
I was just letting a few more people in. Hi, everyone.
Okay.
Thanks so much for joining us today. It's really great to see everyone here. And for those of you who were on our first call, thank you so much for joining us and for the feedback that you've provided. It's definitely helping us to adjust the sessions to make them more responsive to what you're looking for. So thanks for being on the call. I'll pass it over to Cynthia in just a moment. But I just want to let you know that we're really pleased to be able to host this. We're looking for it to be as interactive as possible. So if at any time you want to chime in or ask a question, please just go ahead. You can either raise your hand, send a chat, or unmute yourself and ask Shannon directly. I'm going to, at this point, just pass it on over to Cynthia Wasco, who will take the moderation from here. Thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer. Hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Wasco. I am the Foundation and Corporate Relations Manager for Habitat for Humanity and have worked on several side projects with Jennifer and Raise the Bar Consulting. Just going over some tech things. If you scroll your mouse to sort of the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to see all the participants if that's not already showing up on the side of your screen. There's the chat feature where feel free, if you would prefer that myself or Jennifer ask the question directly to Shannon, you can type it in the chat. Otherwise, you can raise your hand and we will call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and have a direct dialogue. I think that's it for the bottom there. There's also the option to unmute yourself and stop your video if you need to walk away from your screen for any reason. Great, so I'm gonna turn it over to Shannon.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I hope everyone's all healthy and well and having a productive day. So we're going to talk a little bit about systemic change at the board level today. And so kind of the format that I like to use is I want to cover some general topics. Again, I don't know the answers to everything, but that's why we have this conversation, right? And kind of talk about things that work for me or some different research that I've read and really believe in and take to heart. And I would definitely encourage you guys to really weigh in. Again, this is Courageous Conversation, so I'd like there to be some dialogue as we go in. So a lot of what you're going to hear me talk about today really is a basis of a study that was done by BoardSource in 2017. It's called Leading with Intent. And what the study did is it took a survey of more than 1,300 nonprofit organizations. And through that survey, what they found is that 80% of all board members were white. They were all white, right? And 27 of the board surveys did not have one single person of color, right? And so we can imagine why that may be a little problematic, right? really talking about diversity, inclusiveness, and things of that nature. So they began tracking this diversity data since from back to 1994 all the way up until present. And people of color have really struggled to have a seat at the board. Not because a lot of times they don't want to, but sometimes there's a thing we have to ask ourselves, is our organization attractive to people of color, right? And sometimes that's not always the case. But even if it isn't the case, we still have a responsibility to make sure that our board is able to really provide a service or be inclusive of individuals of color. So when we think about, then we have to ask our question is, if we don't have any representation of people of color, is our board evolving, right? So if we don't have people of color, we have to think of how do we get the buy-in from those people of color? Is it that we recruit and obtain a board member? Let's say, we could have Jennifer, for example, who may not be African American, but really have a vested interest in the well-being of the African American community, right? So because she's not African American, maybe she's just a really, really strong advocate of the African American community. So that's, when I say, is your board evolving, that's what it means to me. Are we forward thinking? Are we thinking about what's going on in our community? Are we thinking about our stakeholders? Are we thinking about the trends that we see right now today? Are we thinking about what's going to happen in the future? I put together a small presentation. I'm going to ask Cynthia to bring that up, and we'll talk about some of these bullet points that I've listed there. And again, I encourage you guys to have some dialogue with us. Can you pull that up for me, Cynthia?
Yes. Can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, can you hit play for me? There you go. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about being intentional. Can you hit that first one for me? So in order to really start to think about what's going on and have our board become inclusive, we need to be intentional in what we do. We should make sure that our board members are, number one, they're part of the communities we serve. That's important. If you're not a part of the community we serve, well, we need to get creative in thinking of how do we understand what the needs of the community are, right? And I always say it's real important to make sure that our boards should be reflective of the communities we serve. But again, that's not always possible. And when I talked about a moment ago about being forward thinking and evolving, if we can't be reflective of the community, this is where we really need to think about what stakeholders will help us gain leverage from the Black and Brown community, right? Is it another agency that we partner with or do business with? Is it someone from the staff level? Where do we get that buy-in, and how do we really understand the needs of those that we serve, the demographics? Okay, next slide, Cynthia. All right, building awareness and understanding. It's real important at the board level in order to get systemic change that we really understand the history. We understand what has happened in the past within our organizations. We understand the current disparities, if there are injustices, and we need to really understand our community's demographic. So when we talked about, getting that our board should be representative of our demographic, we need to understand what that is. Who do we serve? What is our breakdown and makeup of our African American community? What's our breakup of our Hispanic community? Our Pan-Asian, things of that nature. We really need to understand the demographic in order to, affect systemic change at the board level. That's really key. If we don't know who we're serving or what our makeup is, then how do we embrace their cultural differences? How do we embrace what they feel those inadequacies or disparities are, to understand that. Okay, next slide for me. All right, this is really important. So understand our implicit biases. What does that mean? Did I hear my name? Sorry. Is that for you? Okay. What does that mean when we talk about implicit bias? So I think about this, when I think about this, I think of, well, what are my own biases within me, right? And I think in order for us to start to move forward, we really have to know what that means. Most people have to push themselves to examine their own biases, and if you don't, you'll never reach what we call the mental muscle. And the mental muscle is meaning having the strength to focus on my biases that reside within me and put together a plan to change that. You know, it could be something, it doesn't always have to be racial biases, right? It could be gender biases. It could be, you know, I think of it when I do things, I think of like my marketing and media. Some of my biases are, does the person I'm trying to reach, would that message be attractive to them based on who I'm putting on this flyer, who I'm putting on this digital material? And again, you've got to think about, if that's my mental bias, I need to maybe sometimes create 4 or 5 different documents that will address the people that I'm trying to reach, whether it's my donors, whether I'm trying to attract to retain new people. So I've got to know what my mental biases are, and I have to make sure that I'm really pushing myself to address those blind spots. How many of you guys drive a car and you know somebody cuts you off and you have a lot of choice words to say, right? Does not happen to anybody but me, right? So you think about that and think about those internal biases within, and think about sometimes what comes out of the mouth when somebody cuts you off, and it's like, wow, where did that come from, right? And again, those can be internal biases, but it's really important to understand what that is, and you know, make sure that we know how they're perceived, we know how to react to those, and we're being cautious about how we articulate or convey what we're trying to get across by understanding what those internal biases are. All right, next slide. All right. So we talk about creating an equity-driven access plan, right? What does that mean? So we want to make sure that we're looking at creating equal access and opportunities for all that we serve, right? Remember, we talked about diversifying the board members, making sure that we create equal opportunity and equal access to leadership advancements, to lead to vendors that we deal with, to make sure they have the opportunity to contract with your organization. So this way we're making sure that, you know, it's not just people that aren't of color, but we're making sure the opportunities available to everyone. And again, in the last session, we talked about what's it called, an affirmative action plan, right? An affirmative action plan, I like it's something that's forced, required, right? Thinking about being inclusive, that's where we talk about making it's to include other people. So when we think about creating equity-driven access, it needs to be something that's inclusive, right? That I want to do. I want to embrace everyone's diversity. I want to impact and affect change. And how do I do that, right? We also talk about, you know, there's another thing to consider is creating partnerships with Black-led organizations that can serve your communities and commit to building capacity, right? And if you haven't done that, I think that you'd be challenged to find there are a lot of organizations out there that are just chomping at the bits to work with people to talk about diversity and affect change. But again, they don't necessarily reach out because number one, we have to think about, you know, is it comfortable for me to reach out or is it uncomfortable? Is it comfortable enough? Am I comfortable enough reaching out to an organization as a Black male saying, hey, look, you know, what is your diversity or your inclusion plan? What are you doing to embrace systemic change? What are you doing to, you know, make sure that you are offering a program or a product or service that embraces equity and equal access? I think it's on us to have the onus to actually go out to these organizations and say, hey, look, I'm really thinking about, we want to change the way we do things. We want to see more staff that are representative of the community we serve. But what does that look like? What does that mean? How do we attract and retain those people? What do we have to do to make it where we are someone that a person of color will look at? And we've got to remove putting these things in place and not monitoring them, right? We have to remove the barriers so that we don't look like the flavor of the month, but it's something that's sustainable long term. One might challenge us to say, look at the BLM movement that's brought us to where we're at today, right? How do we make sure that the work that we're doing today continues for years to come, and not just when there's another case of police brutality, not just when it comes around in February for Black History Month. How do we make this systemic change that's long lasting and sustainable for time, for years to come? And again, we have to use those resources that are available to us. And if we're not, we're missing the mark. We're missing a huge, huge opportunity. Excuse me.
Shannon,
yes.
we have a question. Can you speak a little bit more to the internal work that organizations need to do before they can approach BIPOC organizations? What is it they need to do internally before they can?
Good question. I think what you do internally is you start to look within, right? This is a question that you need to talk with your leadership team about. Look at the makeup of your organization, right? And really understand, first off, what or who you're trying to attract and retain. That's the first thing. After you've done that, then have that conversation with your leadership team and maybe at the board level, right? And say, hey, look, we're looking at best practice. We're looking at other organizations around us. Look, these are what the trends suggest. But we're not there. How do we get there? And sometimes, it is an uncomfortable conversation. I think when you're talking about race in culture, it's definitely uncomfortable. But as we said last time, get comfortable being uncomfortable if you're committed to this work. I hope that answered your question. Any other questions? No? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about—
Sorry, I do have one other question. And maybe this will come up later in your talk, but can you speak about risk tolerance and what might need to change? And can you give an example?
Risk tolerance. Well, whenever you're going through a culture change, there's a lot that's open for, good things happen, also bad things happen, right? I think that if you have the buy-in at every level, I think that helps mitigate some of the risk. But even if you don't, it's a double-edged sword. So you don't have buy-in at every level. Let's say you have it at the board level, but you don't have the staff level. I think that you can expect, there to be some natural attrition. People will leave with change. People will make poor choices because they're uncomfortable. I don't know the answer to how much do you tolerate. I think that if you're really trying to make systemic change, you have to really understand that there are some really big hurdles that you've got to overcome. There's some real big challenges, and you may go through turnover at staff level and board level. But at the end of the day, all I can say is for me, when I think about that, I try to have a plan A, B, and sometimes a C, because you just don't know what's going to happen when you start to hit these difficult issues on the head. You can come to work today and everything's good, leave and come back tomorrow, and now you've got a total different looking staff because Some may not like the change. Same with the board.
We have another question here. Speaking of boards, how do you get each board member to examine their own blind spots?
Good question. You know, and for those of you who know, you guys know that I'm kind of a straight shooter. I think sometimes, you know, just having that tough conversation with your board. And this may be a really good opportunity to bring an external facilitator in to really talk about your vision, where you want to go with the organization, and actually saying, hey, look, we need to look at ourselves first. I think a good indicator is when you look around the room and you look at your board, and if you guys get along, sometimes it's like, you look like me, we talk alike, and we know that our direction is to cultivate a new type of board. And every time we're recruiting or we're bringing on, they still look and sound like the same board members we've known for years. That's when we have that conversation that says, hey, look, what are we doing here, right? And know that it's not going to happen overnight. It's not a one-time thing. It's not going to happen over a retreat. This is something that's ongoing. The work has to be ongoing. Any other questions there, Cynthia?
We did have one more question.
Sure.
Could you speak to the rule of three, the notion of bringing on a number of new board members at the same time in order to provide some level of support to the new members and to mitigate tokenism?
Wow, that's a very good question. Repeat that question again.
Could you speak to the rule of three, the notion of bringing on a number of new board members at the same time in order to provide some level of support to the new members and to mitigate tokenism?
Well, you know, I don't know that I have the correct answer for that. You know, I guess if I were to answer that, the way I'm thinking is, if you know you need to change, you know, it really is just about making the work happen. I don't know how to apply that to a real life situation for me personally. And I mean, feel free to jump in if you have questions or you have a comment. I mean, that's what you're here for, it's courageous conversations, right? I just think that if you in fact need someone to come in, you bring them in. And when we talk about tokenism, that's a bigger issue for me, right? We talked last week about, you know, someone saying, you know, hey, look, Shannon, you're an African-American male, you're a Black male. What do you guys want, right? I think that's where the work happens, where you're saying, look, I don't represent all Black people, right? Black comes in many shapes, sizes, and cultures, right? I think that's where you have that conversation and say, hey, look, this is bigger than me. Let's have a conversation about those that we're trying to serve. Or let's have a conversation about, you know, who we're trying to attract and retain. And let's not keep it isolated to Shannon being the Black male on the board, or Shannon being the Black CEO, or Shannon being the Black employee. Let's talk about, you know, how we really engage or make those changes where it applies to all. So this way we don't really have, we're getting away from tokenism, and we're being more inclusive on a wider scale. I hope I answered your question there. That was a tough one. Thank you. Any other questions, Cynthia?
And this is to you, Shannon, or anyone else in the room who may have any reference points. But the question is, do you have a map of all the types of diversity we can use to strengthen boards? And for example, culturally, racially, age levels, so on and so forth. So I would say if anyone knows of any resources in that way, drop it in the chat and we'll definitely share that out to the group. But Shannon, do you have anything, any resource specific?
I don't know that I would have anything specific. I always try to look and see what, of course you always want to address the protected classes, which, that's pretty standard stuff. It's, contained with Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? That's pretty standard. But I think that, you want to look at, I keep going back to the people you serve, right? I keep going back to your demographic, right? There's so many different ways to diversify your board, whether it's gender, whether it's identity, whether it's culture. I mean, yeah, I don't know that there's I don't know of a roadmap per se. But I think that's something that, you work close with your board and say, look, here's where we want to go, I guess what I'm trying to say here is I empower you all to have those conversations. I don't think things happen. We can't affect change unless we're willing to have the dialogue and not be afraid of the repercussions from having that dialogue.
Those were all the questions so far.
Okay. All right. And again, just interject me. I'm going to talk about this a little more here. So when we talked about, partnering with some Black-led organizations, if you go to resources, here's two that I know very well, and that I know that they're definitely always looking for, a different approach to being involved in the communities where there's very minimal representation of African American or Black folks, and the same with the Latino community. If you click on resources, it gives them some information. I know that someone had sent me an email and asked about some different resources in the community. So if you click on that, Cynthia.
Oh, sure.
But you'll have like the Dunbar pavilions, the African American Center for Arts, and Debbie Chess is their executive director. She's, really, we talked about having the courageous conversations today and said, hey, look, as we talk about going forward with, people who want you to, participate them to affect systemic change, are you open? She's definitely open. And the Black Women Task Force is another organization that really is a great resource to use. And they talk about rights of Black women and how to include them on different things throughout the community, how to help them become leaders and board members, how to attract and retain them. So they were very, very excited. And I did say that I want to share this today with you all. And so, if you want to give any one of them a call, there's the information. And I'll make sure this is available to you guys at the end of, the presentation. Next slide. Any other questions? I'm sorry, I'm going a little fast here.
Not yet.
Okay.
And if anyone has a question, wants to unmute themselves and ask, feel free to.
Absolutely.
I'm sharing my screen, so I can't see everyone.
Okay, can you go to the next? There's another slide right there.
Yes.
So we talked about, holding yourselves accountable again. Folks, this is not easy work. We know that. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not accomplished through a one-time conference or retreat, right? We've got to build something sustainable, making sure that we have benchmarks and evaluative tools to make sure that we're on par for the course, to make sure that, we're not burning out, right? It gets boring, and it's okay, because sometimes you will come complacent and it looks like you're not making any progress. But again, I think once you go back to that tool that you create, if it's an effective tool, it's going to show you where you are and show you where you've come from. We talked about earlier about, learning from our historical differences and where we are today. If you build a sustainable tool just to evaluate and check where you're at, when you feel that things are complacent, that's a good indicator to look and say, okay, where have we come from? All right, we are on par of the course. Where do we go next, right? And at this point is where it's really important to involve your stakeholders. How do you keep yourself accountable if you don't know whether the work you're doing is effective, right? So when you look at that check and balance, so go to your board, go to your, conduct staff surveys, ask the questions, how do you feel? Are we making change? Do you feel more included? Do you feel more a part of the plan? Do you feel more part of the organization? Are we recognizing your cultural differences? Are you recognizing, your Black heritage? Ask those questions, but make sure that you build a tool that provides you with some benchmarks. Next slide. So this is what I want to talk to you guys about earlier. These are the stats that, I talked about that came from that study. So when we talk about 84% of the board members were white, 27 did not have a single person of color, right? This is huge. This is important information to know. This is something that as you're starting to build your plan, you need to really figure out, okay, this is the baseline. How do we get away from that? How do we, once again, become inclusive? How do we attract more African-American? How do we attract more Latino or Pan-Asian board members or people of colors in general? This is something that I've followed for a long time. And I can tell you the work that we're doing with our organization, I'm really prideful. I'm really happy to tell you that, I feel good about, leading an organization where cultural differences are embraced, different races are embraced. And that's some of the work that we're doing now is to diversify our board. And, I always share my why the diaper bank? Well, why not, right? I look at coming here and looking at the history of the leaders, and I thought, well, wow, this is interesting. They're offering the opportunity to an African-American male, right? Was it because I was African-American? Was it because I was qualified? Well, you know what, guess what? I like to think it's my qualifications, but it also makes me feel good to know that being a Black male in this role, that my board is forward thinking, right? And so if we're not there, we have to ask our board, what is our plan? Is there a plan to get to a point where we can be more inclusive or be more diverse? All right, I'm going to open up for questions. Open up for questions and dialogue. Are there any questions there, Cynthia?
Shannon, it's Jennifer. Hey there. I think it would be interesting to talk a little bit about like actual tactical strategies and work that folks on the call have done. Maybe we can share with our colleagues about, how we have very intentionally recruited board members.
Absolutely.
Like, for example, I'll start it off, and other people have ideas. I have close enough friendships with people that I can just simply ask them, hey, are you on a board right now? And if so, or if not, do you want to be? I feel like as a consultant, I have a little bit of a pulse on lots of organizations that need boards, and lots of boards that need members, right? And there's no shortage. I think almost every board is constantly looking for new board members. So I feel like if I can be a connector for folks I know who would be awesome board members, I'm more than happy to do that. And it's some of what I do, just being me in the world. But maybe other people have ideas to share about that.
You know, I want to add to that real quick, and I know that and of course, jump in, folks. I want to hear from you, but I'll tell you, you know, I like you, Jennifer, have a really wide base of colleagues and friends that I think, you know, hey, you know, look, I need you to be on my board. What are your thoughts? I will tell you though, sometimes if I go to my friends that are directors or managers that are Black, a lot of times they shy away from it. Um, and when I ask them, well, why? You know, um, a lot of them don't feel like they're qualified to serve on a board. And you know, it's a little disheartening because you ask them, well, what do you mean you're not qualified to volunteer? And sometimes we have to take them a step further and really have them help them understand their own strengths and weaknesses based on their day-to-day work and how the day-to-day work they would do would be effective or impactful on a board. And, you know, I find that a lot of times they're discouraged because they don't really see that within themselves. And, you know, sometimes if you dig deeper, there's a conversation, well, you know, I applied for this position and I was told that I wasn't qualified. So when they feel marginalized, sometimes it makes it a little more difficult for them to feel like they actually do have the capacity to be a contributive member of a board. And especially when you have a board that is an all-white or majority white board. So, you know, I just thought I'd share that with you all.
We do have some questions that have come in, but first I want to share a comment, Shannon, that was shared with us that you were offered the job because you were the best qualified.
Oh, thank you.
Hey,
that's one of my board members.
So the first question that I have here is, can you speak about how you, in particular for the Diver Bank, addressed class issues within your recruitment of diverse board members?
Well, you know, right now we're in our board recruiting phase. We're doing some recruitment now. We're trying to grow and diversify our board. Fortunately, I haven't had to address that yet, but unfortunately, right? Because I guess unfortunately, because I haven't really had to give it much thought on how I'm going to address that. That's the short answer. But I think it's something that I need to prepare for. We all should be prepared for. You know, yeah. I'm sorry. Next question. Come on, throw some.
Yeah, there was actually a comment made here, but I can turn this into a question. What about your thoughts on the differences in generational recruitment across groups of color?
Very good. That's a good one. You know, I really think that when we talk about generational differences, we have to be very careful with that because, you know, if we're talking about equity and equal access and equal opportunity, I think when we talk about recruitment, we definitely want to embrace and acknowledge people from different generations, right? I really think personally that it really makes for a really good and dynamic and diverse board, because you have to think about the people that you're serving once again, right? And if I'm serving someone, you know, I can look for my organization. If I'm serving someone who is the more mature demographic, right? My generation X's and Y's may not understand their need or their thought process or be able to relate and connect to them. Whereas I may have someone on my board that is a traditionalist or a baby boomer that really gets that or understands that and can help bring a generation X or Y leader to the table and say, you know, let's think about it this way. And then you could have your generation X and Y leaders that say, you know, well, I understand that and I embrace that, but let's talk about a strategy to make us, to move us forward. I think that you really have to embrace both generational leaders or leaders from all generations. So I guess my strategy would be, the short answer is I try to recruit people from different generations.
Those are all the written questions. So again, I'll open it up to anyone who might want to ask a question directly. Shannon, are you done with the PowerPoint or are you still?
Yes, I'm done. No, I'm
Okay.
done with PowerPoint. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And
So, Shannon, this is Milton.
Hi, Milton.
I've been on a few boards here in Tucson, and I was recruited from another organization where another member of the board or member of that organization identified me as a possibility for the board.
Okay.
And that was flattering. And I did join the board, and I had, some motivations for it because I was actively in business then. Now I'm retired. So my time is taken up by many personal things, and I find it difficult to commit the time to boards. However, one thing that sometimes is missing up front, and that is to provide a deeper understanding of the mission to the person you're soliciting, so that he or she may not be familiar with the organization and the history of the organization and where it's going. So although it is flattering and sometimes business to network, it is important that whoever comes on board has a commitment to that mission as well. But in addition to that, once being on the board, I think you have to be actively employed or engaged by that board president or whoever's running that board. So you just don't come to meetings and say aye or nay, and you have to have, I believe, some equity into the process of moving the board forward.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, if you're given a job or task that shows that you can add value by sitting in the seat, then you're more likely to stay in the seat longer.
Absolutely. And, I would say that, I like the fact that you brought up mission, because we talk about mission-driven programs, right? And a lot of times I think what we overlook is making sure that our mission embraces equity and diversity as well, right? And, I definitely agree with you when you talk about the engagement. How do you really get a board to move forward or make decisions if you have people on the board that just agree, right? Conflict is good. Not all the time should boards agree. And if they don't agree, it's okay to have, healthy conflict. It's okay. There's a difference between healthy conflict and dysfunction, right? And if you can have healthy conflict, then you're a working board, right? And I definitely agree with you. Your board president should be engaging at every level, right? Your board president should know what your CEO is doing. Your board president should know what other board members are working on. And if you come, Milton, and have a question for your board president, they should be able to articulate that to you. If not, they should know where to go to get that answer, right? But also doing a check and balance with you and saying, hey, Milton, especially new board members, checking and balance, hey, how are you doing? Do you understand the work? What can I do for you? What resources do you need? And just making sure they feel a part of it and making sure that their input is valued. Okay, I'm sorry, next question there.
We do have a question here. Can you talk about the best practices for give and get policies while discussing inclusivity?
best practice for give and get, that's, that's a fine line. You gotta be careful of that, right? Especially when you're talking about diversity and inclusiveness. When I look at give and get, I look at it on a broader scale of things. If I change a process, if I change a policy, if I change the way I interact with people, what do I stand to gain long term? What do I gain as far as moving the organization forward to a more progressive and forward-thinking environment? So, but you really have to be careful to give and get, because if it's not done correctly, you could border on the line of some HR issues, right? When you think about, well, I'm going to give this African-American person a little more input and not value my Anglo or my Caucasian employees. So I think that when you talk about giving and getting, it needs to be done on a broader spectrum, and you really need to talk about what do you expect the outcome to be, and then start to work backwards from that. If my outcome is being able to attract and retain people of color, what does that look like? What do I have to change internally, process-wise? What am I giving up to get the applicants? Same with the board level. What are we sacrificing, or what are we going to reach a consensus on? I don't like to say sacrifice, because when you sacrifice, you got to give up something, right? But what are we going to build a consensus on and change in order to get the results that we want long term? I hope that answered your question as well.
And this you spoke to it a little bit in answering this last question, and this is sort of a multi-pronged question. How do you balance the need for organizations to be seeking board members with the passion for the mission, with a diverse background that represents the community, with personal or organizational funding, resources, and abilities? We'll stop there for now.
Yeah, that's a multi-faceted question. Say that again.
So how do you balance finding the right board members that have a diverse background, that represent the community, that have the passion for the mission, but that also, can have those resources and funding abilities that you might need as an organization?
I think it's through dialogue and relationship building. One of the things I do on a personal level is, before I invite you to my board, I want to get to know you. I want to make sure that, number one, you believe in the work that we do. Number two, if I can hit a nerve to spark some passion, then we're probably going to have another meeting, right? And I really want to know what your commitment level is. Why my board? If you say yes, why my board? And what value do you bring to it? But I honestly say you have to really, really vet your board members. And it's okay to say, no, you're not a fit, and I want to pick on Jennifer because we do some work together. Say, hey, look, Jennifer, thank you. I really thank you for meeting with us and, wanting to be on my board. I'm just not sure this is the board for you, right? Because at the end of the day, guess who's held accountable? Right? Me. And the board certainly doesn't want to waste their time on building rapport and trying to build a relationship with someone who's just not a fit.
And then sort of a follow-up to that, are there any other criteria beyond those three that were mentioned before that make an ideal mixture of board members? Like, are there any other qualities that people should be looking for other than, resources, diverse background?
I don't think there's a perfect board out there. I think the different qualification depends on the type of board you have, right? If you're a governing board, then you want to look for someone that's really strong in policy governance, right? I think it's just, there's a lot of different aspects depending on how your board is structured. But I think when you look at qualifications, I always like to look at what can they bring to the table, right? Is it one-sided? Probably so. It's a volunteer opportunity, but we're looking to move, to advance the board. So I always look at, if I need someone in my finance committee, I want someone with a CPA, I want someone with an accounting background, right? If I want someone on my governance committee, I want someone who's got an HR background or a lawyer or somebody who's done some policy work, right? If it's development, I want someone who's got fund development experience or business development, people who aren't afraid to go out and ask. So it just depends on the role you're looking for. And it's just like a recruiting for any other position. You have a job description. And if your boards don't have job description, then you need to go back and reevaluate that. And that's the first step. Know what you're looking for, and you're interviewing your board members just like you are a candidate.
You spoke about, oh.
Hey, Shannon, it's Milton again. So do you think it adds any value to have a candidate interviewed or chat with other board members to help with that decision?
Absolutely, absolutely. Your board, your candidate should be vetted with the person who's responsible for running your organization, whether that's a CEO or executive director, whatever the title is, as well as your board. Absolutely. They need to know who they're going to be working with, right? They need to know the personalities that sit on that board. And I always encourage them to come and participate at a board meeting, right? To really just sit back and look and see what happens. And don't invite them to one of your better board meetings. Don't plan it. You need to have them in the throes in a real-time board meeting, because if conflict's happening, that's going to tell you right then and there whether it's going to be a go or no go. And let's not do, I mean, sometimes it happens where you bring them to some of your lighter board meetings where it's we're giving awards or we're acknowledging this organization. So let's go ahead and invite them. Those are good. But make sure if you have the opportunity, don't plan your board meeting. You agendize them, you let your board know they're coming, and you just conduct business as normal.
Speaking of, you mentioned healthy conflict. How do you know when it's healthy conflict versus dysfunction on a board?
Well, I think when it becomes, well, I guess that's subjective too, when it becomes personal, right? But what's personal for you may not be personal for me, right? I think when it's aggressive in nature with an intent to hurt someone's feelings or make them feel bad, that's not good conflict. That's just, you know, that's bully-like behavior, right? I think when you look at good conflict, it's okay to stand on your own. It's okay to not agree with the masses, the other board members. If you guys are passing a vote on something and you want to have some discussion about it, that's healthy conflict. You know, if it's like you're not understanding it, ask for clarification. So I would say, you know, how would I define the difference? I think healthy conflict is just really having a sincere vested interest in the decisions that are being made versus not going along with the vote because I don't like my board president, I don't like my treasurer, or you know, saying things that are deliberately hurtful.
In the desire to cast a wider net, do you suggest open calls for board members?
Good question. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Yes and no. I think you want to cast an open net, but I think you want to vet those people that you catch in that net before you extend them an offer, right? Again, there's a lot of people who want to be on the board for the sake of being on a board. And I had a friend of mine or a person tell me this recently. Getting to the board is not the finish line. That is the start of the work. So when you think about a widespread net, I mean, are these people really looking for something to build their resume, or do they really believe in your organization, your mission, and your vision, and the work you do?
All right, I'm going to jump over to Kyrand, who has a question.
Hey, Karen.
Hey there, it's Kyran. A great resource for possible new diverse board members would be big box stores. I was a manager with CarMax and a chairperson of their foundation. As an example, if a CarMax employee joined a local board, the CarMax Cares Foundation would give that organization the board member fees in that employee's name, so they would be able to claim it as their donation for taxes. So it's a win-win for everyone. And several big box organizations and corporations have those kinds of board incentives. But I mentioned big box like Home Depot or Lowe's or Best Buy because often there's a very diverse group of employees, and it's a great way to find young members too that maybe are like shift managers or folks that have been there for a while, for a few years and have but they're not executive level board members, but they come with money from their foundation.
Okay, nice. I saw a couple of questions in the chat. Can I?
Yes. You want to go ahead and pick those? I know I'm a little behind. I'm like six messages behind.
We're talking about conflict, and I want to address this. Jennifer had a question about good conflict.
Yes.
Does conflict still allow the business to move forward, or is it leading to toxicity in the same way? I think when you have good conflict, it's going to allow the board to move forward, right? If it becomes toxic, then I would say that that's not a form of conflict you want, right? Toxicity, there's nothing fun about toxicity, right? But if it's conflict that allows the board to still move the business forward, that's what you want, right? I've stated my position. I don't agree with the action you're taking, but I lost. I lost the vote, right? Okay, I lost it. Let's move forward, but not belaboring or holding up the organization's progress because I'm now taking it personal because my vote didn't pass, right? And there was one other I just saw. I just want to address this. Another Jennifer says, we have a board member that has her own agenda and can't think, let's go, and I'm exhausted by it. Jennifer, if you have that situation, what I would strongly suggest is that you get with your board. I don't know if you have an executive team or you have just board president and vice president. You have to address that. You have to take that head on. It's exhausting. And if you don't address that board member, we just talked about toxicity in the previous answer, that could potentially be a toxic board member or toxic relationship. So address that head on early on and get it behind you. And you may want to strategize with your board chair and vice chair beforehand and let them know where you're at. Because you know what, they may be feeling the same thing, but may not realize that everyone else is feeling the same thing, right? And if your job is to lead the organization forward, I'm fortunate that I can have very honest conversations with my board about where I'm at and how I feel about things and address it. And I'm hoping that's the case for you, but make sure you address that. Don't let that go.
Shannon,
All right.
Jennifer, that's an interesting question, I think, because to some extent it's the board's responsibility to hold that board member in check. And sometimes I think too much of these kinds of dynamics fall on the ED or the CEO, who is employed at the discretion of the board. So sometimes if there's toxicity on the board, it can be difficult for the executive to move that needle, but it's also the responsibility of the other board members to hold that person in check and to help to move things forward. And certainly it'd be great if you could do it in collaboration with each other, but I don't think you should let the rest of the board off the hook there. Just my 2 cents.
Oh, great.
I don't have any pending questions. There was one question that I was asked a little while ago. Just on your board, what makes for someone who would not be a good fit for the diaper bank?
What makes someone who would not be a good fit? Well, there's a couple things. I think someone who sees the organization as leverage for their own personal gain, that's certainly one that you wouldn't want. And the other I would is when you have a board member who is not open to change, who is not open to allowing the board to evolve and lead, who is not open to allowing the very people who have been hired in their place to do their jobs, those are board members that pose a challenge, right? You know, it's real important to know that in most cases, the board they're a governing authority or a development authority. The operational aspect is something that belongs to the CEO or ED. So if you have those types of board members, I think those are things that can hinder an organization from moving forward.
I don't have any other pending questions right now.
So I'm off the hook. All right. Well, guys, I mean, suggestions, I mean, anything you guys have, that's what we're here for. What's working in some of your organizations? I mean, I would really encourage an open dialogue amongst you all as well. We want to make sure that, you know, we're here in support for each other. And if there's anything you're stuck on, let's talk about it now. No? Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sapir. I am the co-founder of Culture Peace Alliance, or COPA, which is a very small nonprofit. I think we've reached 70,000 a year. We have no paid staff. Some of us get stipends when there's enough donations, and we do a tremendous amount in the community. We're a peace building focused organization, and we fiscally sponsor several programs and events like Take Back the Night, you know, that maybe that's something some of you have heard of in the community. We have a very different structure than I'm hearing talked about. We don't have a CEO, you know, we don't have any of that. We have, in our coordinating council, we don't use Robert's Rules of Order. We use formal consensus, which is from, at least in my knowledge, is from the Quaker tradition. And we are, so when we have disagreements, we actually document the disagreements, and formal consensus allows us to talk more thoroughly than often a traditional Robert's Rules of Orders does. And then we note those disagreements with the decision. And if the person isn't too vehement about their objections, move forward, they stand aside. It's called standing aside, or allowing us to move forward. So that's one thing, is that board, you don't have to, we don't want to call ourselves a board. We call ourselves a coordinating council. So that's another thing to think about if you're forming. And Amanda knows us, and she knows we've struggled a lot to make the, you know, not just the appearance of that kind of approach, but to actually have it be consistent and manifest. She's aware of our early struggles when we were first forming. And I think that that's another way to look at it, to look at diversity, is how we structure our decision making. And, you know, and so a lot of people I found really relax when they, in that kind of an environment. And anyway, I just wanted to share that may be other ways to look at broadening your approaches to diversity, you know, if you look at decision making as well as one of the ways. Thank you.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing that. Thank you. Okay. Any other questions there, Cynthia?
No questions coming through yet.
A question for the group. Does anybody have, stories of success that they would like to share with our peers on the call here? You know, what has worked for you when it's come to diversifying a board that you either have been a member of or that you have helped to lead as an internal CEO ED? And maybe it's that we're all just really struggling with this, but I'm curious as to who has
Can you repeat that, please?
Hi. So my question was, do you have strategies for diversifying a board that you feel have been successful that you'd be willing to share with the peers on the call today?
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Hey, everyone. So I mentioned to someone in the chat a short while ago, or I think I sent it to everyone, that I was actually brought onto a board this year as a result of a diversity initiative. And it was an organization I was familiar with, I had volunteered for, they were familiar with me. So, you know, without applying, they approached me. But once coming on board, I learned that part of the process was the use of their board matrix, which most folks know is a useful tool in helping to take a look at the skills, connections, demographics, qualifications essentially of your board in its current state, and looking for the holes or the gaps, so to speak, of skills, characteristics, etc., that your team deems would be beneficial to the board and the organization. I know there's sometimes some pushback against using a tool like a board matrix, and if you've never seen one, you can Google it just to see what it looks like. It should not be the sole determining factor in who you recruit, but you know, the results just this year alone, by anecdotal and just coming into the fold, and like I said, having worked closely with this board before, that was like 85% female, probably 95% not people of color. And just in their first year of attempting to diversify, simply by taking a look at that board matrix again, it's been a phenomenal year. Now the work hasn't stopped, but I think we would all say that it's off to a great start. So a board matrix, if you have not yet employed one, is a great place to start, I think.
Thank you. I think making the commitment too, right? That this is going to be a priority, like period, hands down. And it's just as much of a priority as reviewing the P&L and the financial, the financials and the balance sheet every month. Where are we and how are we managing our money? Where are we and how are we managing being responsive to and reflective of the community, and diversifying leadership at the organization is another idea that I have. Really prioritizing it to make it move.
Yeah.
Oh, Patricia has a question. Go ahead, Patricia.
I apologize for not having video on. There's some construction going on here. This has been brought up in various ways, but I was working with a board where they really wanted to focus on recruitment and diversifying the board. And when we started looking closer though, we realized that before we really should do that, we needed to take a look at the organization itself as a whole, because there just wasn't enough there were barriers and obstacles that were just going to make it difficult, even if we did recruit someone, to retain someone and really have them be effective in the role. So we really took a time out and we've gone back through the organization trying to build more inclusive structures, and also looking at what systems we had in place that were creating barriers that we hadn't recognized. And I think that, you know, probably in a few more months, we'll be ready to approach the recruitment from a better space and hopefully find someone who can be effective in their role.
Allie, did you want to say something? I saw that you've unmuted yourself a few times.
I was just going to say, just also being really responsive to people that show interest in your organization, because sometimes the best board members show up when they're maybe offering to volunteer, but you can't really figure out how to fit them in, or a consistent donor, or just people that stop by and ask to take a tour of your building. That we've found board members in really unique and creative ways, and I think that just being responsive to people that are showing interest is really important.
You know, to add to what Ali just said, I think it's important for your board members, all board members, to really volunteer and understand the work you do. It makes them stronger advocates. It makes them understand and support ideas. And you know, if you're looking for some kind of financial fundraising, it kind of gives them a real clear, in-depth idea of what the work is. So if you can get them to volunteer at any phase, in any level, do it. Take advantage of it.
Go ahead, Kyron.
Hello, folks. Again, I apologize for no video. I'm on my way to Phoenix, but I wanted to share. I was hardly ever asked to be on a board, and in my 40-year history, I've led some of the largest and been part of really dynamic programs. But I was never asked by those organizations to be on the board. Often I was asked to attend board meetings where I would speak to the board and help the board make decisions. But I was never considered to be qualified to be on the board, even though I was often for 15 years I was the one had huge budgets and were very dynamic, but I was never considered to be qualified because of my background and my education. And so just want to put that out there, that maybe within your ranks, you may have the best dynamic new board leader to help you with this. And yet maybe they need a little bit of mentoring in regards to the process. But just consider, it wasn't until the Northwest YMCA 7 years ago, that was the first organization to actually ask me to be on their board.
Okay.
Oh, Kyron, there's a follow-up question. Do you still have that problem of getting on boards or being asked to be on boards now? Oh.
Maybe we lost him.
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Carmen, you're on mute.
Oh.
Sorry, I cut out there, but hopefully you guys heard what I said.
No, we didn't.
Okay.
Maybe he's out of range.
Yeah. All right. Jennifer or Shannon or anyone else, does anyone have any direct or resource links or places where people can find samples of board matrices? Like actual templates?
You know, there's I want to say, I don't know the name of it. I think it's Board Link or Board. I'm trying to look. I usually
So
have it.
Board Source has some,
Board Source. That's it. Yes.
and if you just Google board matrix sample or examples, there's a sea of, they might not all be awesome, but there's a sea of examples floating around online in the public domain that might be helpful to folks.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. It is Board Source. Questions? Any
No
other-
questions coming through.
So last time, after a certain amount of time, we sort of said goodbye, but said we would stick around for an after party. And I will say that the after party got pretty cool and juicy, and all of a sudden we started having like very real conversations as a group. So if there are no other questions, we could certainly remain on the call, but otherwise wrap up for the people who want to head out. What do you think, Cynthia, Shannon?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, I thought you put it out there. I'm sorry. Yes, we'll stick around. If you have any questions, we'll be here. And if you've got to go, thank you so much for tuning in and for participating. Once again, if you have questions, my email is available. That's probably the best way to get me. Yeah, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Shannon. This was very helpful. I really appreciate your perspective.
Absolutely. If I can do anything else to help you further, let me know.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Everyone who registered will receive a follow-up email, and we'll have Shannon's contact information, a recording of this, and links to all the resources that were both talked about and might have been typed in the chat as well.
All right. A little smaller there. Jennifer, whenever you take it away.
Should we turn everyone off mute? Do folks want to turn off mute?
I think so, and just let everyone jump in and really, if there's any specific situations that you want to address or we can help you through. I think this is an opportunity to do that. So.
I will say that I might have said a joke here and there that might have been interesting.
Hello.
I joke about Mexican all the time because I'm Mexican.
Someone's got a little bit of background noise.
Well, it's still in the centerpiece or something like that. I'm sorry. But this is something that, about my own culture, but I get to laugh about
Kristen here all.
I just muted her.
Okay.
I think she sounds like she's on the phone or something.
Oops. Thanks so much for coming to the call and staying on it. This is cool. We have 24 people hanging on.
Mm-hmm.
So
gives us a lot to think about, because our board has been diverse, but not diverse enough. That we've got a good breadth of we've had from the people in their 20s to their 70s, so we have a good breadth and age. But it'd be nice to even expand that.
Can people say their organizations when they speak? Because we can see your name, but not your organizations.
I'm with the Diaper Bank.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Oops. Nick Sapier was jumping in.
Oh. Go ahead, Sapir.
Okay, I just wanted to remind people that I posted a longish post about youth involvement and sort of a couple of the ways they've gotten involved in our organization that I think it'd be good for people to read, just to get a sense. I like what Ali said about just you don't know where they're going to come from. And like and the other thing with young people is they're on career tracks often. If they're dynamic enough that they want to be on a board for an unusual organization, they're probably on a career track. And so they're not going to be there long.
Yeah.
And it's important I think, to be flexible with that, even though we often want longer commitments. And so, like, there's one young woman who, she happened to hear us. We were doing, Dr. Bernard Lafayette, we're doing a program at Pima Community College. She happened to be upstairs working late. She was a Title IX person for Pima Community College. She heard us and she came down and said, "What's this?" and got so excited about us. She joined our board for about 6 months and did a few really great things for us. And then she moved to Atlanta, but because, she kind of invited herself into the board. So she was African American, and so but because of the relationship we had, and I sat with her and talked to her before she left to get some input about what she experienced with diversity and race and things like that within our organization. And that was enough, just having a conversation was enough that we're still in touch. And now she wants to do something like we're doing here with nonviolence in Atlanta. So you never know. And I think it's, there's no shortcuts to relationships. There just aren't.
Yeah, unfortunately, we had several board members who joined. They happened to be younger, but unfortunately, they were resume builders. And we had one that was with TEP and great potential. And she was in her early 20s, and we really enjoyed her, but didn't even show up for the first board meeting, and ended up we had to ask her to resign because she was just MIA. And I don't know if you've got some ideas, Shannon, on how do we kind of prevent that in the future to, somebody that's just looking to put it on a resume, and that was fully her, I guess what her game was, I don't know. But we've had others like that too. And it's unfortunate. Sometimes they have some really good input, but they're not there for, they're just there to put it on a resume. What do you think, Ken?
I don't know how to prevent that, Craig, but what I will say is, I sit on some other boards as well, and we have a lot of younger board members from like the University of Arizona. But one of the things that we're really clear up front is when we have them sign a letter of commitment, right? And, we break it down into, we call them our junior board members or whatever, especially if they have no experience. So we have them sign a letter of commitment for at least a year, right? And then our board president sits down and really outlines the expectations. If you miss, 2 or more board meetings in this year without whatever prearranged, you may be asked to leave. The reason I want to build resumes, right? That's a part of reaching the executive levels and ranks. Is a lot of times people want you to serve on a board at some point.
Right.
But it is a disadvantage of the organization if you're just there for a couple months and you leave. And it's tough even at a year. But the reality is, if you're there for a year and you're effective, and you bring some value, then what I would encourage is to start having them think about people who would probably replace them if we know that's what they're going to be leaving, right? I just think that's tough when you have a younger board member with the level of commitment, but that's why we do a lot of that up front is vetting and vetting and vetting and vetting. And here's a letter of commitment.
I think some of it too, Shannon, is to start to deconstruct some of these parameters that were built. A lot of organizations haven't modified their bylaws in 10, 20, 30 years. The, you know, what was the normal course of not just business, but sort of the way society operated in 1980, 1990, and 2000 is far different than today. Things are much more rapid pace, and people, to some extent, expect some level of, I would say maybe more instant gratification. People, there's an expectation for all of us to move quicker these days. And so I think expecting people to have a 3-year term or a 5-year term is already perhaps not setting us up for success. Coupled with the times that boards meet, the way they meet, the way they are inclusive or exclusive of all sorts of people. So, you know, for example, I have a 4.5-year-old child now. I can't do anything until everybody's out of the house, okay? So anytime someone has, you know, any group has a 7:30 meeting, I'm never doing that. And so if that organization, same thing in the after school hour, right, for parents, for example. So if those organizations don't offer some level of meeting by phone or Zoom, voting remotely and all of that, which let's face it, most organizations didn't until about 3 months ago, that's going to exclude a whole lot of people. And I think that younger people, I think that parents, I think people who are on the go and remote, boy, you know, if they could Zoom into the meeting, if they can vote remotely, if they can do those kinds of things, and we can free up needing to physically be in a space to meet and to physically sit in committee after committee to not get stuff done, then we're going to see a lot, you know, more people want to be part of the process because it's more engaging, it's a little more rapid, and it's much more flexible. So I just want to put that out there to everyone on the call, because a lot of times when organizations come my way and they ask these questions, I look at the structure and the expectations, and I think this just doesn't fit most people's lifestyles anymore, regardless of our backgrounds, our ages, etc. It's like it just doesn't quite work. And so I think wherever we can kind of not set ourselves up for those failures is a great place to start.
Amanda, you had your hand raised a while ago.
Yeah, thank you. This is Amanda Brockman. I'm with United Way, and in that role, I direct the Cradle to Career Partnership, which we have a leadership council, not exactly like a board. There's similarities, some differences, but my question is really, when you know that you've not got to increase diversity on that council or that board, and there are some individuals there that, for lack of a better term, are just dead weight, not really contributing. They're not causing problems, so they're not in that toxic category. But you know that there are other folks in the community who are representative of the communities you're aiming to serve. How do you tactfully let those people know that it's time for them to leave? If there isn't, and we don't have term limits, so it's nothing like that. How do you have those conversations?
We've had that in our organization, and it comes down to a heart-to-heart with the person, and to say, you know, I've noticed you haven't made your committee meetings, and you know, we do have certain rules with absenteeism, and I just wanted to check with you to see if you're really, you have the time to commit to our organization and the energy, and you just be real honest with the person, and I think it either gets them to recommit, or you know, by natural attrition they move on, and you know, it's not really as uncomfortable as you would think it would be, Amanda.
I think if you have the expectations letter and perhaps some sort of regular review like you would with a staff member, it sounds harsh, but you can make it soft.
That's
Just to review the commitment periodically with the person every 3 months or 4 months, whatever it takes to keep them engaged. One thing to keep them engaged is to have them assigned them tasks that you need to have fulfilled. And that way they'll feel like they're a part of what's going on. They're contributing and not just showing up and again saying yay or nay to the issues that are on the table.
You know, I think that oh, go ahead.
Are you speaking to me, Shannon?
Yes, I'm sorry, go ahead. I don't know how to mute this thing.
Well, I think it also really matters why they are having trouble participating. For instance, we have a couple of members who are in their 90s. They have been part of the organization in multiple ways for you know, I mean, I've known some of them for more than 20 years, even before the organization. And so I personally am willing to go through what I need to go through to make the meeting, make it so they can get to the meeting, you know, and that takes, again, I have to communicate with the families. So one of them, a family member helps them get online because there's nothing wrong with their ideas. They just can't do the tech stuff to get online. The other one, again, nothing wrong with her ideas and her contributions. She just forgets when the meetings are, so I make an extra effort. Now, we also have youth who don't have technology. They're undocumented, they're poor, and they don't have tech, but they have a phone and they can access Messenger. So I send the invites to Messenger. I take the effort. Again, there's no shortcuts to communication. If we aren't able to make those efforts, then the suggestions Craig had are very relevant. You know, but if we have a member like myself who is willing to do that, because I see the value of their contribution, then I think I like what's happening with us. So thank you.
The other question would be, now, how do your other board, are your other board members on board with that as well? Yes.
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, nobody wants to get,
Well, yeah.
very
But
much
what's a
so.
little different is, you know, if you guys, the board, feel like you're okay with that, then, you know, but I think where some of the problem may be is if you have a very similar situation when somebody's not contributing and you have, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 board members that feel like this person's not a contributing member, then at that point you've got to make a decision on whether you're going to continue the relationship or sever ties.
Right, and you know, one of them we have moved into different roles, you know, because they don't have the memory capacity, the engagement capacity to do the roles that they used to do. But they still have good ideas when we're having discussions around an issue. There's nothing, you know, their contributions are very, very solid at those times. And that's even for the young people. That's, you know, that can be a little bit bored with how seniors kind of go on and on, you know, they're still willing to do that. And other board members have helped with this task as well, because, you know, I sort of like tend to take up tasks and not keep it a secret and let, you know, and then people start caring and want to help, you know, so it's not all on me then. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
It can also be helpful to have, I think someone might have mentioned evaluations, peer evaluations. You can also do anonymous evaluations about the whole board's functioning. You know, how as a board do you feel? The board assessment of itself is really, really important, and we often don't do enough of that. I can tell you when I work with organizations almost all the time, the board has never assessed itself. And so, I mean, this really is, it's not rocket science at all. And it's not really that innovative of an idea, but most boards have never done it. So just coming in and encouraging that, and sort of mixing that with matrix and anonymous evaluation is like golden for a lot of organizations to really just start to be able to have a space to build a better board. I'm loving the feedback on the call. It's good. So I'm telling you, the after party is where it's at.
Yeah.
It is.
Any other situation?
I think in your future invitations, though, you should let people know that there is an after party so they can plan for it. Because otherwise, so they can schedule it in. Otherwise, it becomes a little exclusive. You know, I think that everybody who's participating in this courageous conversations is really seeking knowledge, and wherever they're at on the continuum is hoping to gain new skills or maybe share skills, and that's really exciting. And I just based on, you know, I've had some work with Julie Ragland and John Peter Wilhite and Deb Dale, and in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we can't just be like, oh, my board needs to be diverse. Like it's my whole life. Yeah. It's not like, oh, like I need to find these people for this board and then like call it a day. And so we have to just keep doing that work.
I was listening to the Today Show, like randomly. I actually don't watch it usually, but I was listening to it a couple, it was probably a month or more ago, and Al Roker was on, and but it was you know, a few of them, and they were having a discussion, sort of post about, well, they were having an intention discussion about race in America and sort of in the aftermath of the George Floyd death and the sort of reinsurgence of Black Lives Matter. And they were just talking about the reality of so much of American life, to your point, Amanda, still being quite segregated. And he was joking around about how he's like, let's get real. You see all these advertisements on TV and it's a great start, but where are all those very diverse house parties and like, you know, and diverse churches that we see in the, you know, in the advertisements? And they sort of, you know, they sort of joked around about Sunday being the most segregated day in America, where, you know, white people still go to generally white churches and Black people tend to go to Black churches. And so they were having a really, really interesting conversation about that, and about, you know, how as much as things have come so far, there's still a way to go. And to your point about being very intentioned around who you invite to every single table. And so he was having this conversation about how what he and his wife do, and how, you know, he's like, our parties try to look like that, but I can tell you that the parties we go to don't. And so, which I thought was kind of bold of him to say on national television, because I'm sure people are listening who are his friends. But I thought, well, that, you know, it's a really honest conversation that that we probably all think a lot about, but don't really have. And how you get intentioned at every point of your life is very important.
Right. No, it's so true.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have anything? No? The after party's coming to an end. Well, you know, once again, I thank you guys for your participation, your questions, your conversation, your dialogue. It's, you know, again, I don't have the answer for everything, but some of what you guys have said have helped me also think about, you know, some different ideas and approaches that I need to look at here in my own organization. So thanks for that.
All right, thanks for joining us on the call, everyone. I guess Shannon took away the keg. No, I'm just kidding.
I took it away. All right.
Thank you, everyone. And if you,
Thursday, don't forget Innocence doing another.
yes, and we are close to capacity. So if you were thinking about it, sign up because that is definitely going to sell out or reach capacity.
Yeah, I missed what
Thank you,
you're
everyone.
talking about. What are you talking about?
Thursday's session.
Innocent.
Is there an email out, Jennifer?
What is your session? What's the, what your session is on Thursday?
Yes, the session is entitled Examining the Role of Race and Class in the Formation of the U.S. Nonprofit Sector. Take that, keep in mind, we are not experts per se in our field. I'm basing my presentation on what I have learned and what I have lived, and it'll be a rich conversation. But yes, it's this Thursday at 2. And the link is in the same place where you registered for Shannon's presentation and the first panel discussion if you were there as well. It's all in that same link.
And there will be
and it's all part of this series, right?
Yes. There will be a reminder email that will go out tomorrow for Thursday as well. So if you're on Jennifer's email list, you will receive it. Keep an eye out.
And if you revisit that landing page, just take I would encourage you to take a brief look at all of the workshop descriptions, just so you can go ahead and register for them all at one time. That's what I did as soon as Jennifer and Cynthia put out the page. Just register for all of them.
And we'll push on Facebook a little bit too between now and Thursday. So there'll also be a link there as well. Awesome.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for a wonderful discussion. We'll see you Thursday.
Okay, bye, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yes.